Good morning and congratulations for attending the first morning session. You have been very disciplined. I don't know if this meets the trick question of this conference or not. Welcome to the second day. My name is Boris Čučković Berger and I will try to chair this session. I'm a PhD candidate here at the Courtauld. I work on a project dealing with the disenchantment of digital production in contemporary art, roughly coinciding with the financial crisis of 2008, which actually means I don't technically practice digital art history, which I hope to learn more about from very, very concrete presentations and projects we'll be hearing from our speakers today. In many ways I practice... Oh, sorry.
I don't know if that means... Oh, that's
doesn't... That's the microphone. Ah, there we go. Okay. Good. So my introduction will not be recorded. That's perfect. Right. So what I try to say is that in many ways I practice the reverse of digital art history. So if we understand digital art history as kind of a strand of digital humanities and as our discipline's response to this wider trend. So I just want to signal the possibility of thinking about the humanities of the digital as sort of a reverse engineered project in which maybe art history also has a place in adding, our historical knowledge to understanding our present day constellation. So thinking about maybe Alex's presentation from yesterday and the influence of PowerPoint slides and the way the relevance of any kind of visual studies increases exponentially simply through those means. However, I also want to maybe add another way of looking at this problem of discipline in the encounter with digitality. So, and that's my attempt actually to kind of recapitulate the points from yesterday's conference, from yesterday's very, very thought-provoking sessions. A point was made about funding and about the fact that, which is really relevant for this session, that a lot of the imperatives or the impetus for making apps comes simply from the availability of funding, which is compared to the resources at disposal for research in the humanities in general, usually larger. It's certainly the case in the Netherlands, where I studied before coming to the Courtauld, where the creative industries fund is bigger than the total funding available for research in the humanities, which actually also places another question of discipline then. So if we are expanding into these new and non-customary ways of dealing art history, are we in fact a part of another disciplinary framework, right? Are we being directed in, let's say, the direction in which the funding bodies kind of determine the new disciplinary horizon? So are we escaping a discipline or are we becoming more disciplined, right? And I think that's at the heart of the question of this panel today. It's not a matter of quantifying, are we more or less disciplined, but rather of kind of reflecting on what happens when we, so to speak, exit the disciplinary frames that we're accustomed to as art historians and enter new ones that may become attached also with digital technologies. So it's not only an exit, it's also an entrance to discussing disciplinarity. Some wiser sociologists than me from LSE have already started discussing the impact of digital humanities. In their case, it's mainly big data on the very practice of sociology. So whether there is something fundamentally or epistemologically incompatible with sociological knowledge if you think about big data research. And I think these concerns are really, really valuable to add. This doesn't mean that we have to resort to technophobia. Just that maybe the other side of the coin needs to be raised in parallel. So we have to simultaneously think what we can contribute to the general understanding of what digital tools and methods bring. And that, I think, is very much in line with what we heard from yesterday. For instance, Joanna Norman of Vary Institute brought the really beautiful, I think, example of the plaster cast of the Emperor Trajan's column, which is remarkably useful when you think about simply the access to images. And then we had, of course, Sam Bibby's warning of the perils of technology. In light of, incidentally, he's using the smartphone right now, warning us that students cannot pick up their issue of the Art History magazine journal, if they're, with their noses buried in smartphones passing along the Courtauld library, right? And joking aside, there is something serious to be questioned in regards to digitality and our interaction with digitality. So I guess the question from the perspective of this conference would be, where does the disciplining act, so the discipline, comes from? It doesn't come just from art history, it also comes from these new socio-technical environments. Right, and this would be maybe an echo of Jennifer Mundy's question raised yesterday. So if art history cannot really be undisciplined, can it be unleashed into these new territories? So can we use art history to maybe learn something new also about digital art history? Right, so sorry if this is a bit abstract. That's why we have our two lovely speakers to give us more concrete examples of the practice of digital art history. I hope this will be useful to keep in the back of your minds before we enter the discussion. So the first speaker today is Amy Jeffs, a PhD candidate at Cambridge University, working on 14th century illustrated manuscripts, but her sort of a side hustle is to convene the digital Pilgrim project, about which I think we're going to hear more about. I don't know. So please welcome Amy.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. Sorry about the provocative title. I thought it would be sort of sensational. But really, obviously, I'm a great advocate of digital art history and digital methods. So I'm going to take 5 minutes to introduce the project that brings me here and kind of use it to explore two main questions that may reflect people's impression of digital art history. The first is that the term digital art history may imply the existence of the digital art historian, and what could this look like? And it perhaps also implies that we're engaged in new discourses as a result of digital technologies, and these have sort of new disciplinary boundaries, and is this true? So, the Digital Pilgrim project is why I'm here. It all started when between 2016 and 2017, we produced photogrammetric 3D models of 12 medieval badges in the British Museum's 680-strong collection. As everyday image-bearing objects in medieval northwestern Europe, more or less, they are a crucial insight into the visual language of the general population. By extension, they deserve more art historical attention than they have received. Some are pilgrim souvenirs sold at holy sites, things like Thomas Beckett's head reliquary here. Some display the emblem of a noble family, so we have the Talbot dog, which was an emblem of the Earls of Shrewsbury. And some are more bawdy, like winged phalluses, or a nice vulva dressed as a pilgrim over here. They were moving images designed to be worn, handled, recognizable on approach, and viewed close up. Later, impressed foil badges were sewn into manuscripts. For the most part, they were eventually thrown away, consigned to sewers and rubbish heaps in the riverbanks where they are now found. And though they shone silver when freshly cast, most have dulled and degraded, their imagery obscured. From a curatorial perspective, 3D modeling medieval badges was appropriate, whatever the collection item. A 3D model creates a data-rich archival record, and display online makes material available for study and teaching. Likewise, these particular objects are challenging to display in the gallery space, and thus even more needful of auxiliary resources. The potential to virtually handle and scrutinize these micro-sculptures as 3D models using fingers on a touch screen or a mouse simulates the experience of the original owners, who may also have held, observed, and rotated their badges in their hands. So I was interested in how the virtual model might simulate sensory engagement in informative ways. So what is a 3D model? Photogrammetry is currently the most accessible and affordable means of applying this technology. You photograph an object from lots of angles, ensuring the images overlap. You can then process the images using structure from motion software, which finds points of commonality between all the separate photographs and registers each one as a point. So for each badge, we had about 300 images. This makes a low-density point cloud, which is converted into a high-density point cloud. The points are then connected with a polygonal mesh, and finally the whole thing is overlaid with texture and colour derived from the photographs. So here you have a 15th century Pilgrim souvenir of the head reliquary of Thomas Becket that we modelled. They can then be uploaded onto a display platform. The 12 digital Pilgrim models are displayed on the British Museum's Sketchfab page. Sketchfab is a 3D modelling platform that has allowed institutions to upload models of collection items, grouped according to theme and annotated with explanatory labels. From just over 30 when our project began, the British Museum now has more than 250 3D models of objects in its collection on Sketchfab, and there are other museums that have followed suit. The rise of the medium in art history has been facilitated by funding like the Digital Project Grant from the Paul Mellon Centre for Studies in British Art, which is what enabled the Digital Pilgrim project. Our work has led to several 3D models being published in issue 6 of the Paul Mellon Centre's pioneering digital journal, British Art Studies, and they form part of a conversation piece about 3D modelling and its application for art history. And the 12 models themselves, of the objects themselves, have gone from almost complete anonymity to receiving nearly 9,000 views in virtual form, as they are visited by teachers, artists, students, and other members of the public. So co-convening this project, or perhaps to have made me into some kind of digital art historian with an armoury of technical skills. At one conference, someone asked me a question which began with the words, "As a digital guru, do you think," which was really generous of them, to say the least. I'm an art historian, but only a digital guru in as much as I have Instagram and a fairly solid grasp of Microsoft Office. So actually 2 years on, I've never made a 3D model. From the beginning, we worked with a PhD candidate in archaeology from UCL called Rob Coletta. He'd been modelling Bronze Age axe heads for his own research and was involved in the British Museum's Micropasts project. He had insights that came with years of experience, and there's no way we could have done it without him or if I had tried to learn it all from scratch. When we presented the project together, I was confident the technical side of things was accurate and could focus on applying my own skills to image-based research and exploring the theoretical implications of digital modes of reproduction. So there's Rob photographing that head reliquary badge. The Zurich Declaration for Digital Art History states that digital change requires critical reflection about the methods and practices of art history, such as the way pictures are analysed and canons are formed. There should be a productive two-way relationship between research questions and digital applications. But how do we find out about these applications and the best ways to use them? There are various fora. The Venice Digital Humanities Falls School, fantastic initiatives such as DAHPP here at the Courtauld, but also outsourcing expertise can create fruitful dialogues and enrich your project's overall quality. And I know that DAHPP brings in people like Rob to give workshops, and that would help you sort of develop kind of professional contacts. And if this means that you have to generate incentives to get people to help you, like money, then so be it. The Arts Council and the aforementioned Paul Mellon Centre offer digital project grants, and I'm sure more will become available as funding bodies sort of cotton on to the scope of digital to enrich research and outreach. So the digital art historian does not necessarily work alone, and there is much that institutions can do to facilitate collaboration. Sorry, I've slightly confused about my slides. No, okay. So now the second point, and final point, that digital art history is profoundly connected to long-standing art historical discourses, is now up for discussion. 3D modelling, for instance, raises theoretical questions about reproduction that have been asked of images for a long time. Medieval pilgrim souvenirs are often miniature depictions of monumental sculpture, and thereby constitute one of the earliest forms of mass reproduction of art in Western Europe. A popular form of pewter souvenir sold at the shrine of St. Thomas Becket in Canterbury represents his ornate gold head reliquary. Another represents his shrine. Both of these monuments were destroyed at the Reformation, so the badges are a precious record of some of their physical characteristics. Dredged up from the Thames, they are the extant remnant of a much bigger corpus of copies designed to be image-bearing mementos, portable and affordable. The father of printing, Johannes Gutenberg, actually designed and produced pilgrim souvenirs for the town of Aachen in Germany. Tokens were churned out in tens of thousands via stamps and moulds and sold to hordes of pilgrims who pinned them to clothes and accessories or sewed them into manuscripts. Contemporaries were not oblivious to these souvenirs' relevance to the Christian discourse on image making. A discussion appears in the imagery of folio 184R of the delicate prayer book of Joanna of Castile, dated to the late 15th century. It contains an author portrait of St. Luke at his desk composing the gospel text. Above him rests an icon depicting the Virgin and Child. I hope you can all see that. The evangelist's eyes appear lifted to the image. You can't see that, but take my word for it, as though he is using it to mediate his communication with God. The icon alludes to the widely held belief that Luke had painted the Virgin and Child from life. Beneath the scene is the opening of Luke's Gospel account of the Annunciation when Mary conceived Christ, and it follows the opening passage of the Gospel of John concerning the Word made flesh. This recalls the Augustinian theological stance that the incarnation of Christ justified the making of images. The textual context of the author portrait thus authorizes Luke's icon of the Virgin and Child. However, the portrait is part of an even more profound statement about imagery production. It is enclosed by a green border filled with 17 trompe-l'oeil images of pilgrim souvenirs. They have been painted to look as though they are sewn into the margins, as real tokens often were. The artist has placed one trompe-l'oeil souvenir depicting the Virgin and Child close to Luke's icon. It seems to claim its authority from the portrait itself, and by extension from its holy subjects. So up here you've got a Virgin and Child souvenir next to the icon. So the decoration on this page shows two images of artworks, one the mass-produced memento, and the other a unique image by an apostle. As they're depicted in the same media, they're materially equal. As they portray the same subject, they're symbolically equal. The artist seems to be asking the viewer to think about different forms of representation and their status in relation to an invisible authority. We have made illusory pilgrim souvenirs through 3D modelling, and I just quite like this juxtaposition. They are hypernaturalistic, and by engaging the sense of touch and uncannily convincing, and I think generate some of the similar sort of aesthetic pleasure to these trompe-l'oeil souvenirs from the 15th century. In exploring these kinds of reproduction, we always come back to the paradox of the original. Does it bring it closer or dilute its authenticity? Last year, the British Art Studies published this conversation piece with Digital Pilgrim that centred on these questions, and they kept coming up. We're still having the same debates as are being explored on this page. So to conclude, medieval pilgrims caught the holy reflections of reliquaries and mirrors. We capture culture in lenses and screens. To quote David Roderick, the experience of the work does not lie in any one element, whether textual, acoustical, photographic, videographic, or now 3D computer modelling, but rather hovers between in mobile acts of perception and memory. There is no digital art historian, there is no digital art history. There are new tools to apply to old questions and more discoveries to be made. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Amy. Next up is Dr. Sophie Hatchwell. So Sophie teaches really many courses at the University of Bristol. You seem to be half of the Department of Art History there. She's also a co-founder of the Early Career Researchers in British Art Network. So this would be a career development group that supports early career researchers across the field of British art. Please welcome Sophie. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Hiya. Okay, morning everyone. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Fern for inviting me here to speak with you today. As a part of what's been a great conference so far. I'm really enjoying it. Today I'll be talking about digital art history in higher education teaching, and I'll be making the case that there is the need to bring digital skills training into art history teaching at higher education HE level. This will be rather speculative, and I'll focus less on the how we need to do this, but more on the question of why should we. So I'll be considering the benefits and challenges for formally introducing digital skills through HE teaching. And also, I'm going to highlight some of the ways in which I believe this could lead to some disciplinary development. So just to give you a little bit of background about myself, as you will have guessed in that introduction, I'm a teaching fellow in the HE sector. I'm enthusiastic about digital education practices, and I also make use of some digital technology in my own research in art history, particularly things like geomapping. The theme of my paper today is prompted by my own experience in art history research and teaching, but actually also originates in a conference that myself, Fern, and our colleague Hannah Leeper co-organised just at the end of last year, which was on the use of digital art history by early career researchers. And it was inspired by this thing that Diane Zorich talked about, that younger art historians are more ready to, quote, think through technology. And we wanted to kind of find out what that might mean. So our conference was called Digital Art History, Practice and Potential. It was held at the Paul Mellon Centre and here also at the Courtauld. So in my paper today, I'm going to talk less about my own work really, and more about some of the examples of digital art historical practice we encountered in this conference, some of the range of amazing digital practices employed by current early career researchers in art history. And I'll be reflecting on some of the conversations this led to about how we can facilitate digital practice in our field, why we need to do this, and how we should go about it. And I think that was a really useful moment to refer back to Fern's panel introduction yesterday afternoon, where she mentioned her own vision for what art history should and will be, which was about art history becoming increasingly involved in engagement and communicating with the wider public. And Fern argued that digital technology is going to be really the heart and the centre of this. So that's kind of the sort of general theme that I want to frame my paper around. So just to give you a kind of brief overview of what I'm going to be talking about, I'll begin my paper by introducing to you some of the digital projects we showcased in our Early Career Researchers Conference, highlighting the sorts of skills these projects used, making a case for why they're useful to the discipline, and also reflecting on how they could be taught at HE level. I'll move on to address some of the issues and challenges that the adoptions of these skills raises, obviously financial issues, but also the need to clarify our disciplinary approach to veracity and criticality. And I'll conclude by stressing the importance of digital skills acquisition at HE level and tentatively suggest some of the ways in which we could begin to affect this through cross-sector collaboration, but also by rethinking the scholarly value we place on digital outputs. So first, let's see some examples of digital projects by early career researchers. I'm going to show you about 4 different examples by researchers who have used digital technology either as a research tool or as a means to disseminate their work. All of these actually come from the conference Fern, Hannah and I arranged. And what we're going to see is a good example of the sort of skills held by early career researchers at present. And I want to begin by looking first at 3D modelling. I have 2 examples to share, but the initial one I'm going to present to you is this work by Elodie Gossant, which is from her PhD project, George Watson Taylor, Collector of Paintings in Regency Britain, which was examined in 2016 at Paris-Sorbonne. So the image I'm showing you here is a screenshot of the digital modelling project that she made as part of her PhD research. So Elodie used information from primary sources, mainly sales catalogues, to reconstruct the decorative interiors of Earlstoke Park, Wiltshire, which was one of the residences of Watson Taylor. And he was a major collector of fine and decorative arts in the Regency period. Okay, so what we're seeing here is such a decorative interior and the range of furniture, decoration, and fine art that formed part of Watson Taylor's collection. Okay. So Elodie used SketchUp to provide this sort of reconstruction of an interior in order to investigate patronage and display. And this 3D model became for her an invaluable tool for research and for learning about how Watson Taylor's collection would look in situ. There was a house sale in 1832, so this kind of information, this kind of imagery has been lost to us since that time. So this is a very important sort of resource to bring this material back together. Beyond her own project, this approach can act as a kind of blueprint for interpretation of the layout of contemporaneous rooms, with the potential for other researchers to refer back to this model to help them approach and understand how to evaluate rooms in similar properties. Now, Elodie hasn't integrated this into any specific public engagement platform, but I think looking at this work you can imagine how that could easily be done. It would not take much cost or effort to embed a finished 3D model of this public house into something that could theoretically open the doors of this lost building to the public. Having built the model in SketchUp, the file can be saved in such a way that it can be easily embedded, for example, into an app or a website that has VR capabilities. So you can imagine quite easily how this could become a sort of great resource for public engagement. The second example, I'm just going to touch on this because Amy did such an amazing job about talking about Sketchfab before. This is another example of the Sketchfab platform. Obviously, we've heard from Amy how digital Pilgrim uses this technology. So this is a 3D model sharing platform. At our previous conference, Tom Flynn of Sketchfab talked about how this tool can be relatively easy and inexpensively used to create and upload reconstructions of objects, obviously using the process of photogrammetry. We've seen some examples from Amy so far. This is an example of a Buddha head from the Rijksmuseum that's being 3D modelled. So while this process is sort of enhancing the activities and the online reach of various cultural institutions, you can see how this is creating a new lease of life for collections online, with these extraordinarily detailed 3D copies that can be enlarged, rotated, and explored. This technology obviously opens up objects to a wider academic audience for research and for study, particularly useful where we see the original objects are hard to handle or delicate or small, the Pilgrim badges being obviously the main example of that. But it also allows for researchers from different locations to come together with collaborate on researching this kind of objects. There's also clear potential for such technology to facilitate audience engagement with hard to access collections too. So there's a couple of examples of digital modelling. I'd like now to share a couple of examples of digitised databases and search algorithms and how the organisation and management of big data can be adapted for research purposes. First, we have the online database of the exhibition of modern European paintings 1905 to 1915. This is an online database that's been set up by a team at the University of Vienna and a couple of people working on it are PGRs, Normally Maloli and Christina Bartok. This site aims to collate information on all exhibitions of modern art in Europe between the dates given, using this purpose-built platform. And what we're seeing here are screenshots of the kind of test sort of beta front ends of this project, which will go live this coming autumn. This database of exhibitions is structured and arranged by categories such as artist, geography, date. And the intention is to be able to, or to allow researchers to compare and visualize and trace exhibition trends, to be able to research strategies of modern art promotion across the continent. Now, the data contained in this database is based on information taken from extant exhibition catalogues currently held in hard copy in archives across Europe. So the sort of information here is already available, but it's going to be difficult to access en masse because it's dotted around in many different places. This database, therefore, is going to be a great research tool because it's going to be able to facilitate comparisons of source material drawn from disparate locations en masse. The researchers, Nermali and Christina, are also interested in how this database can, as much as possible, reflect the contents of the original primary sources, sales catalogues. The criteria that govern the inclusion of data sets in this database is actually drawn from the categories listed in the original catalogues themselves. So what that means is the digital resource is arranged around the sort of information that you can find in the original source material. Quite interestingly, where there's errors in the original exhibition catalogues, the database is replicating those errors, but also pointing them out and including a correction too. So there's this really great relationship between digital resource and analog resource. So there's a number of amazing uses for this type of tool. It can, as I've said, provide the ability to compare data sets across a disparate range of sources. This can lead researchers to find trends and also lead them to find new lines of scholarly inquiry about this type of information material. For the researchers, Nermali and Christina, it enables them to look at the establishment of avant-gardes, for example, across Europe, and also things like the social operation of exhibition spaces. So the second example of data management online that I wanted to share with you is the As Infinitum database of Portuguese azulejo. Apologies for my terrible pronunciation. Azulejo are decorative Portuguese tiles. Okay. So this database is a project affiliated with the University of Lisbon Faculty of Arts, and a couple of the contributors, Rosario de Carvalho and Inês Aguiar. And what we're seeing here on the screen is a screenshot of the kind of front end of this database as it currently is. This project aims to assist research into the azulejo by compiling a database of digital images of tiles, which is structured and searchable by information categories such as pattern, design, digital images in situ. So you can see the different category highlighted in blue towards the top: in situ, iconographia, etc. Okay. As with the previous project, the European exhibition catalogues, the aim here is to facilitate comparison, but also retain or reflect as much as possible the qualities of the original source. This particular database uses the controlled vocabulary of the icon class system to aid user searches. And it organises and documents its information in a really interesting way. It looks at the iconography of tiles across a wide historical period, so it can drive research into decorative aesthetics. Secondly, it looks at the in situ locations of extant tiles, and so also drives research into decorative practice, space and architecture, with the potential also to prompt research into the socio-historical context of these decorative tiles. And all of these different criteria are searchable through the database. So once again, we're seeing an example of how digital technology can or has the potential for driving new lines of scholarly inquiry, facilitating original scholarly research by bringing together a range of geographically disparate objects, and in this case particularly including examples that may not otherwise be available to the public, as in being located in private environments. So what I've done so far is introduce two areas of digital research, digital modelling and database management, and highlight their benefits for research within art history. What I'm now going to do is talk a bit speculatively about how these could be brought into HE teaching, or how the skills and technology needed for these can be brought into HE teaching. There's three things I'm going to cover. First of all, the need to have a pedagogic rationale for this. Secondly, the need for staff experience and training. And thirdly, the need to ensure access to the relevant technology, to the software and equipment. So let's work backwards through these three categories. In terms of software and equipment, well, the first thing I'd like to highlight is that there's a large amount of open access software freely available. A perfect example of this is the digital modelling software at Google's Sketchfab platform, which is openly available to researchers to use. I would also point out that universities increasingly will have digital education teams who will have very strong knowledge of the sort of software that's available, either open access or that the universities or your universities have already purchased. So these are kind of good people to go and speak to find out what's available. It may be, in terms of staff experience and training, it may be a bit of a surprise to some of the more sort of old school members of our discipline, but a large number of art historians will already be using some form of digital technology in their research. So there'll be a lot of untapped skills available in many departments ready to be passed on to students. And as our previous conference proved in October, early career researchers in particular are likely to hold such skills and are often a natural fit for any such jobs in many departments that can use this digital educational research. Failing all of this, collaboration with other academic departments working with technology or collaboration with industry partners is another option. This is more logistically difficult but ultimately a rewarding way of bringing in such digital skills into the HE sector. And this form of industry-based partnership is increasingly a priority for HE in general in terms of sort of funding and outward-lookingness. Finally, the most important point, pedagogic rationale. I'm not suggesting that we need to totally revolutionise our teaching practices. In fact, what I am suggesting is that the sort of technology I've demonstrated today has a logical place in our existing programmes and in our current practice, and can be easily integrated into our teaching in a way that complements and facilitates our existing pedagogical aims. So this is not about necessarily exiting current disciplinary frameworks, as you mentioned in your opening talk, Boris, but just about expanding what we already do. The main thing is having a clear pedagogic rationale for incorporating technology in art history at HE level. And this means having clear aims and outcomes and identifying the most suitable technology rather than shoehorning in new tech for the sake of it. In my practice, there are two areas where digital technology forms part of my teaching practice. First, in developing independent research skills for students working on research projects, leading up to and including the dissertation. So the ability to deal with online repositories of information, images, archives, and art historical literature. So these are tools that are invaluable today when so much academic material is increasingly available in digital formats. And the second way I incorporate this kind of thing in my teaching is by helping students develop the skills to deal with information disseminated through digital formats, including learning the ways to present work and share it online. So this can be useful components in any units that deal with public interpretation, access and engagement, or that deal with contemporary digital art and media. It's about making sure students have the real-world skills they need or will need in an increasingly digital-orientated professional world, and also they have the capacity to think and respond critically to the digital spread of information. It's worth noting that we already use a lot of digital technology in our teaching delivery, so it's not a big leap to start including practical digital skills in our teaching too. This complements the increased use of digital technology in teaching delivery across HE level in general. So, for example, that we use virtual learning platforms such as Blackboard, Canvas, Moodle, and also just the basics such as PowerPoint and lecture capture. There's a lot of evidence, there's a lot of research been done on how students respond to these digital learning methods. HEA, as was survey of 2006, found student response to this is overwhelmingly positive. HEPI, Student Academic Experience Survey of 2016 highlights the need for more consideration of the impact on online resources in student learning. So this is something that at a kind of management level or corporate level, this is increasingly being considered. So like I'm saying, there's evidence students are responding positively to digital approaches, and it's not a big leap for us to bring in digital skills. So just to touch on some of the challenges related to all of this, obviously money is a big one. And I'm not going to say much about this, but I will say that we need to be pragmatic. We need to make use of what's already open to us. Open access software, the facilities digital education teams provide, and the skills and staff ECRs already hold. And last one, this question of authenticity and veracity, the usefulness and reliability of digital tools, and how we can sort of make the most of this. So we need to make sure that the digital resources we use are useful. They provide clear and traceable information to original source material. That we need to maintain links to original sources with the research tools that we're using, and that these research tools should be governed by well-considered research questions, acknowledging gaps and biases of information, and arguing on the case of the evidence available. So to conclude my talk today, I'd like to suggest two things that we could do to move towards a digital pedagogy. And these are tentative suggestions, but I argue meaningful and beneficial. And the next step will be to work together to discuss and strategise how these can be achieved. Firstly, I think we need to think constructively about our collaborative opportunities beyond our own field and beyond academia as a way to develop research practice and bring in and/or develop key digital research skills in our departments and within our student body. And finally, we need to rethink how we value digital scholarly practice within the discipline, but also within the structures of higher education. Thank you.
Have a quick discussion.
I should sit down.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you both. I'm definitely convinced now that digital art history has a future. There seems to be a shared thread in the argument for digital art history, which would be this issue of access and of opening research material really to multiple audiences, maybe other disciplines as well, but certainly from different geographies, right? So I'm curious, how would you comment on this actually frequently raised frame for digital art history, which would be the democratizing aspects of research? Do you find it a plausible argument in defense or for funding digital art history? Are there any limitations there, and so on?
I think that the digital provides us with a great opportunity to disseminate our work, to reach wider audiences. That there's a huge amount of platforms that we can now use to share our own work, and that this means that we're not necessarily going to be restricted by the kind of tight academic nature of some of the more traditional publications. There's obviously still a very important role for that, and a place for it to hold, scholarly journals and these big monographs. But it's also great to be able to share our research in different ways and connect with different people. And if we look at the social media platforms and so forth, can be a really, really interesting way to do that and spark really great conversations with people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think I have two ideas from that question. The first one is that with digital Pilgrim models, advocacy was so important, and just if you are kind of making things available like that, and especially things that people don't really know exist, like Pilgrim Souvenirs, it really helped to plug it on social media and to go out and speak about it at conferences, and to go even into schools. Like I went and taught 2 Year 3 classes last week about finds in the Thames, and we used the models and they were playing with them on a smart board. And so that having that kind of willingness to promote and sort of go out and make contact is essential. It's not enough just to make things available and put them online. And I had another comment about it. No, okay, I don't remember.
This makes me think about both of you comment on social media and its benefits in terms of dissemination and access. This makes me think of Jennifer Mundy's comment yesterday about the Tate catalogs from 1960s being open to public, and then what kind of a Twitter storm they can raise if something is uncritically copy-pasted. Does that mean one can imagine the need to hire more art historians in social media content teams? What do you think?
Part of the aim is to get people thinking critically themselves.
Right.
That, we can't be sitting there, with the burden on us to do the critical thinking for people. We should be, and that's what, I'm speaking from a kind of teaching perspective here. It's what we want our students in universities, regardless of our discipline, to do, is to have critical thinking skills. And you mentioned some of the disadvantages and perhaps the challenges of social media. One of it is that there's a sort of increasing temptation just to take it at face value and think about it in a very uncritical way and just receive and soak in the information rather than sort of challenging and thinking about it. That's our role now in academia, to encourage this level of critical thinking and critical engagement and questioning. So I think it's great to put provocative stuff out there on social media and get people talking about it, to actually get people thinking in a critical way. You know, that's what we need to encourage rather than sort of manage, if you know what I mean.
Okay, so there are definitely benefits there. So then you would say it's a question of how to handle it on Twitter. Maybe that's the wrong choice of words. Maybe how to foster debate rather than trying to hide behind a label.
Yeah, absolutely. Fostering, respectful, meaningful debate is really what we should be working towards. And, from my perspective, I'm talking about, teaching in HE, and that's something I really want to do with the students. Yeah.
Thank you. The second shared thread between the two talks would be the one of collaboration, really, when it comes to this problem of the skill gap. And you two seem to have different yet kind of aligned positions on it. Amy, you outlined the benefits of outsourcing, right? Of bringing in other disciplines. Can you maybe expand on that a little bit more, especially after hearing Sophie's eloquent argument for pretty much skills training for art historians, right?
Well, I think that it really depends on what you want to do and where your strengths are. And I love using Photoshop. There are certain aspects of digital technology that, it's like anything, that I feel more willing to engage with and learn and just better at it than other things. And I think the reason that I took that position wasn't because I think we should outsource everything, but more because I feel as though some people are put off engaging with digital technologies because they think they're going to have to commit to a summer school or go to all these things and learn all this stuff that seems threatening and big and alien. And actually that if your strengths are with the physical and with the sort of more traditional art historical practices, that doesn't mean you can't be involved in a digital project or a project that depends on digital technologies.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sophie, did you have to?
I think I agree with that. I think we're basically sort of sharing the same position there, to be honest, that, there's the pragmatic aspect. You make use of what skills you have, what skills your colleagues have, what your capabilities are, and then when anything else needs to be done, you collaborate with other people who can make that happen for you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Shall we maybe open the floor? I see a question there.
I find the sort of British fascination, which is of course a political one, with impact in both of your talks, rather engaging, amusing, but engaging. But you seem to think of impact as benign. Certainly our colleagues in Scandinavian studies have realized that the work that they do, the serious work that they do, could be appropriated by ethno-nationalists, is being appropriated by ethno-nationalists for their own purposes. And I'm sort of struck by the notion that the pedagogy you were talking about in the classroom is one which is now a global classroom, right? How do you then use your notion of critical thinking, which is as weak and pathetic a concept as one can possibly get in the humanities, to somehow or another control for this kind of, I'll use the term, misuse?
Could you just repeat the last aspect of your question, please?
Well, your notion is that making things globally available is by definition a good thing, right? The images, the three-dimensional images, are going to be used in the most benign and positive ways to induce critical thinking in students, but by extension in the global community. How do you stop it being used for exactly the opposite purposes?
Okay. I would say, first of all, in terms of impact, which was the first thing that you mentioned, the terminology I was using was engagement, which has a kind of different angle to it. Impact in the kind of field we work in is about encouraging change and inspiring change in practice beyond academia, and that wasn't what I was engaging with. In terms of this sort of benign use of the material, I was very much talking about the use of this scholarly information within the study, research and learning of art history. If you are to expand that to a kind of more global, broad audience, it's great that it means we can share our work and share our information with a broad audience. Of course, we can't control how that audience is going to receive it, so long all that we can do is be clear on how we're articulating ideas and the kind of transparency and veracity of our work. In terms of critical thinking, I stand by it being an important skill, an important graduate attribute, the idea that you're not just going to accept information, be able to work with it in a meaningful way and think about it and challenging it and debate it. And again, I advocate that that is an important graduate attribute and is something that is valuable to talk about in teaching and higher education. The idea is that then those graduates go out into the world and have that ability to sort of challenge and debate ideas. Once they're out in the world, I mean, what can we do to control it? But it is important to talk about it because the sort of students that are going to be passing through universities are going to be members of this global environment where there is this kind of mass inundation of information in digital formats that is incredibly hard to navigate and can be very provocative in many ways. You know, I'm going to say the word fake news, for example, is one of the issues we're encountering. If we start those debates about thinking critically, about debating, about arguing, about challenging on the basis of evidence amongst the graduate community, when they go out into the world, they can make their small contribution to spreading this need to change and debate on the basis of evidence into the broader community. And that's my perspective, sort of coming from a teaching fellow position.
Mm-hmm. I think what you said.
There's a difference. Tia, please.
Thanks, everyone. Just on that critical thinking idea, I was struck with this particular image, Emily, that you showed, where it's paper, you know, and the idea of scrolling, and you know the way that you scroll down an internet page or a resource, and it struck me as actually something that is a big difference in the digital and what you talk about with the modelling, because here you would scroll and find something, but it remains static. But in the digital modelling tool, you scroll to find something, and then you can focus in on it and move it around. So that actually strikes me as quite a significant difference, and I was wondering what you made of that sort of material impact. And but this question also came from some earlier thinking, which is just about, like you said, the scene between digital art history and what came before the internet is that it comes up with similar questions, but I think what I raised there has some implications, different implications, where insight would actually be very different.
Big question.
Yes, no, I mean, it's more.
Oh, a comment. Yeah. I suppose what I was broadly saying is that it hasn't changed our disciplinary approach. You know, we're still coming up with questions in similar ways through things like juxtaposition, and I quite liked the idea of taking a medieval manuscript with some illusionistic Pilgrim souvenirs and comparing them to a screen with some illusionistic Pilgrim souvenirs, and to use that to talk about ideas of image making and reproduction. And that means that contrasts are evident as well as parallels. And I think then thinking about the aesthetic response, and one of the things that's interesting with this like realism, trompe-l'oeil style, is that the drama it must have had when it was being, in this period, is akin, I think, to some of the drama and novelty of the 3D model, and whether or not that retains its potency. So how long have we got? One of the things that Digital Pilgrim enjoyed was the fact that this stuff was brand new. You put it on Twitter as a GIF and people were really excited, and it's like the illusion of 3D modeling is very fresh, and maybe the same project won't have the same success in 5 years' time or 2 years' time when some of that aesthetic novelty is worn off.
Christian first.
Thank you very much to both of you. It's really, really interesting. And I mean, I have two short points, and the first I think links up rather nicely because I really liked how you stressed these connections that there's not digital art history versus art history. At the same time, I was almost a bit surprised that you say it's about generating new answers to old questions, because I was wondering whether it shouldn't be also like the goal of a digitally informed art history or whatever to create new questions or new perspective of some sort. And the second question would be with this 3D modeling with the interiors. I mean, I find on the one hand super interesting and relevant and everything, but then I mean, isn't it also a bit suggestive? Because I mean, when you do a model based on textual evidence, and the model looks like, okay, that's how it was. And I was wondering how digital art historians, if they exist, could account for like what we know, what we don't know, like gray clouds in the image, or I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to go? So I don't know what, I don't think there are new questions. I think that the site of the authority of the original, or what the original is one of those sacred mysteries of art history that we'll never find an answer to, but we'll constantly talk about because it makes us think about Western culture or whatever. And so, if I said, I can't remember now exactly how you phrased it, but I don't think the pressure is to find new questions. I think the pressure is to come at really important, interesting questions from different angles, and that digital stuff does kind of provoke slightly different ways of seeing or ways of thinking about some of these issues that have been current forever. What do you think? Yeah?
I think if you're talking about being able to open up information resources, archival information, particularly from resources that have previously been quite disparately spread out and difficult to bring together, it can lead to new lines of inquiry because you're able to kind of draw stuff together where there is a rationale to do so in such a way that you're able to compare in a logical way and for a particular purpose that leads to new ways of thinking and new ideas.
What I think I'm saying is that the really fundamental philosophies aren't necessarily changing, but the roots and things are, and that's fun and exciting and keeps the discipline buzzing and whatever.
Yeah,
so.
Brilliant. I think to answer the question about the interior, what I perhaps didn't make quite clear enough, although I spoke about it in an abstract sense, is the need to have this link to the original source material when you're doing kind of digital reconstruction. So that was kind of one of the final points I ended on. And perhaps I didn't explain it as fully with the Ostrich Park example, that all the information, as you've gathered, is based from the original source, but the level of detail in the original source is such that it can tell you room by room the sort of objects that were there based on the house sale catalogue of 1832. So the objects that are being placed room by room in the reconstruction were objects that we knew were in those rooms. And also the interiors are modelled accurately based on the plans we have of the house, so the dimensions of the rooms and everything, and the record of the decoration is correct. You're right in pointing out that when you digitize it and make it an image, there's the danger that you can look at that and say, yes, that's definitely how it was. So it's about articulating this is a very well evidenced interpretation of how things looked. We know those things were there, we know they were positioned together, we know they were contained within this room that has these particular dimensions. Within that they can be slightly moved around and we could see what happens with that. So the main thing is to be able to stress the link with the original source material and the evidence of where this interpretation has come from, and then being very clear that this is research and inquiry, which is actually completely how we do things when it's not digital as well, right? So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
There's a question in the back. No. I'm sorry, the lady to the left of you.
So that was really, really interesting, but I noticed that in the main we're all talking about projects that are kind of, before the 20th century, mainly before 1950. So I was wondering if you could say something about the application of digital art history methods for people who are studying or researching more contemporary period.
I think we're both talking about how this digital technology can expand and inform and aid the practices and research approaches that are already there. I don't think either of us has talked about a kind of revolutionary practice that is about doing something entirely different from what art history does already. So it's very hard to comment in the abstract about.
Wondering if there are any concrete examples.
Right.
I can give examples from my PhD if that's allowed. For instance, not necessarily in the art historian practicing some kind of overtly digital methods, but when you talk with an artist, since that's one of the privileges of studying contemporary art, you realize that they have different kind of material, often hidden in their digital image files, high-resolution photos of financial centers during the financial crisis, and then you started to see some buried bankers inside of skyscrapers, and you're able to have a conversation about that, about the different quality of images with the artist, and so on. So I think knowing a little bit, at least, how stuff works, how a JPEG functions, how far you can zoom in feasibly in this kind of, I think it helps. I think it's crucial, and it also bleeds into the curatorial work, let's say, when you kind of push them in the direction of maybe asking historically relevant questions. Yeah. So we're running out of time. There were a few more hands. Maybe just the last over here, and then we'll close.
This is a practical question, I suppose, in terms of when digital work like this and collections is put into open source formats. Is there any kind of standardization that's being used that might make it so that we don't have to retrospectively go back and data clean all of this at some point to use it as an open source, open access way of comparing different collections around the world, like that might have a lot of room for expanding research possibilities, basically. It's just a practical question, standardization.
I don't have I know that this is the world of museums is feeling its way through this revolution. There was a meeting last year called REACH. It was organised by the Perry Foundation and the V&A, and it involved bringing together representatives of museums across the world and discussing strategies for digital technologies, especially when museums feel threatened about putting stuff out there and what that will mean for the collections, but also how incredibly useful it is for creating accurate records and public engagement, all that kind of thing. So they published a report, and I would direct you to that.
Okay, thank you all, and thanks, Amy and Sophie.